second. Welcome, everybody. My name is Blake Cohn. I am the Executive Director of the National Network of Schools in Partnership, and I'm really excited for you all to be here. This is a very important conversation, and I'm grateful for Laura Day for really spearheading and pulling together our panelists to share their work and their stories of what's happening at their school, along with advice, hurdles, challenges. As always at NNSP, we would like to keep it realistic and not just always optimistic. So I'm going to turn it right over to Laura so we can use our time wisely. As you, if you're just jumping on, it's being recorded. If you have to run and come back, I will send this out as soon as we get it sort of cleaned up and downloaded, and I will send it out along with any resources that people share. Feel free to put things in the chat, and I will collate all of that stuff and send it back out to you so you all can have all the documents and everything that's shared. This is a open learning experience. As much as we can share with one another, the better. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Laura. Not only is she our senior program consultant here at NNSP, but she is also the director of the Institute for Social Impact at Hockaday School. So Laura, and she has a snow day in Dallas, and she's here. So super kudos to her. And Michaela, also another one of our presenters. It's unusual for them. So anyway, Laura, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It is unusual. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Glad we're having this conversation. Our hope is that this next hour and 26 minutes is more of a conversation than it is more of a presentation. When we thought about having this topic, I'm sure a lot of you think about this a lot. In my role, it's something I think about all the time. And I think in schools, especially private schools, this work of DEIJ and then community engagement sometimes can get siloed into different areas, and there's not as much intersection of them and of it. And so I know that's important. And so what I thought would be neat for today is to have two schools talk about what they're doing in regards to this. But then the third person I thought would be neat to have talk with you guys is one of our community partners who works at the Dallas Independent School District to talk about the other side of this work. Like, what does it look like when it goes well? And what does it look like when it doesn't? And what are we aiming for as partners of our community groups, which I think is super helpful. The anecdote I will share very quickly before I hand it over to Kim is that about 2 years ago, one of our alums called me on my cell phone, not sure how that happened or how she got it, but she called to talk to me about what was I doing in terms of training our students about going out into our community and having them be prepared, thoughtful, and thinking about all of the things that were going on in our country at the time. And I didn't have an answer. And I thought, oh my gosh, like that is we've got to figure that out. We've got to figure that out fast. And so we, put in a couple programs that you have to take now, that our students have to understand the city, the makeup, what's going on, and start to understand about that more. But that was kind of, to me, something that really sent me on a journey of how are we integrating this work more intentionally. And so we have Kim Causey here from Isadora and Newman, who's going to talk the first two presenters are going to talk about, some cool things that they're doing, some challenges they've had, some advice they give. And I'm going to hand it over to Kim.
Okay, hi. Yeah, my name's Kim Causey, and I'm at Isadora Newman School in New Orleans. And just to give you some context, our school has 1,200 students, a little over 1,200 students from early childhood, 6-week-olds up through 12th grade. The school was founded in 1903, so it's got a long history, and it was founded for Jewish orphans. And so just right there, you've got some community engagement and equity and diversity, just right there from our founding. What I'm going to share is just about my experience the past 7 years and kind of how we have gotten to a place where we, as a school, are thinking about the intersection of community engagement and DEI work. I will say that obviously I've only been here 7 years. And so there was 112 years of school history prior to my time here. And lots of people would have lots of different views of how well the school has done with this work over the, you know, the big history. My perspective is really narrow, just over these last 7 years. And so, and I want to acknowledge like some of the things that I know have happened, that they're, you know, that this philanthropic clubs were a long-standing tradition, and back in the 70s became the Actions organization, which is an organization of students that I still work with today. So a long-standing group of kids who were working to get out in the community. And the school has had a strong partnership with ADL for as long as it's existed, working on anti-Semitism and fighting hate. So there have been these partnerships and you know, groups that are working to do this work for a long time. And then that even like in our school pre-Katrina, I believe that we had service hours, and there were a lot of group service projects by classes, and that a lot of that fell away after Katrina. And we can probably understand that now, because we can see how some of our programs have kind of fallen apart during COVID when you have this kind of big events happening. But so where I'm going to start is just in 2015, where when I came to the school, there was no one person who was in charge, no one person or one committee or group or anything that was in charge of community engagement or DEI work. It was kind of that model of it's everyone's responsibility, which we know means then like if there's a teacher or a student who's really passionate about community engagement and partnerships or about equity issues, that they might spearhead something and it might be passed down after they leave, or it might not. But there were no coordinated school-wide efforts at that time. And so my original title was service coordinator for all 4 divisions. And like you guys know from working in schools, I was also had another full-time job at the school, working in their academic resource lab. But my job as the service coordinator was meant to try to align what was happening in all 4 of our divisions together, so that we could have a bigger impact, that we could deepen relationships with the community, that we could really work on talking to the students about things being mutually beneficial, getting away from this idea of that savior complex of drives and things like that, but really actually engaging in the community and partnerships. And so, so just to like my lens when we're talking about community engagement and partnerships is really about human dignity and accompaniment and like social justice and relationship building. And so over those, starting in 2015, we started moving away from that language, because language is important, of service even, to engagement, and talking about how do we engage and partner with the community, not how do we serve, because we're not going to pretend that we know what the community needs until we get to know people in the community and work with them. And then maybe we can find where our talents lie and where with their needs. And so like one example that I tried to that we were working on that was really successful pre-COVID and now is not happening, but was working on criminal justice reform. So we held every summer for a week, we had a criminal justice reform week where we partnered with an organization that was created and run by men who were formerly incarcerated. And they just took us under their wing, and we just did a deep dive and bore witness to the process and the system. And along the way started forming relationships with these folks and figuring out how the kids could step in and make a positive impact. But that certainly wasn't service, right? It was this blend of community engagement, partnerships, learning from the community, and then figuring out how do we move forward. So as we kind of build, so that was a kind of a slow process. So 4 years. And then in 2019, the school was ready to kind of officially move to that language of engagement rather than service. And at that time, even created, because I know staffing is important and many of you have many different jobs, that to create a full-time position for community engagement, where I didn't have another full-time job as well. And so then at that point, we started, DEI work really did start falling under my umbrella. But at that point also, the administration at the time didn't feel like our community was would be receptive to the language of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we weren't using that language, but we were putting those programs kind of under that umbrella of community engagement. So working with ADL, taking kids to the SDLC, the Diversity Leadership Conference through NIS. Those kind of programs were under that. And during that year, I also had the great fortune to work with Laura Day, who you all know, on creating a proposal and working on this language. How do we talk about these and help folks see that they intersect? And so our proposal included the Office of Community and Inclusion, with these pillars of community engagement and DEI being put together. And there were grand plans all on paper. And we finally got it done and submitted it to the administration in February of 2020. And so then, of course, COVID started and then nobody read it. and we left campus, and we were remote learning. And so over those months, though, I was working with the kids who attended SDLC on writing their stories of their own experiences and coming up with a presentation for the faculty and staff of their experiences and their ideas for what are some things that we think would make our school more inclusive. And what happened is that they were ready to present that to the whole faculty and staff from all 4 divisions. And the timing ended up being that it happened the day after George Floyd was murdered. So the next day, the kids are giving this incredibly personal, heartfelt address to the faculty and staff, and it was very powerful and very moving. And then that summer, of course, just like all of you, probably we had the Black at Instagrams and these calls for racial justice in our community, and for accountability and wanting to know what we're trying to do. And so at this point, the community decided we could use the language of diversity, equity, and inclusion and be more explicit in saying, yes, we are committed to this. And so that was really the catalyst. And that summer we started affinity groups, and the board had a DEI task force, like many of you, started doing a review and focus groups to figure out where we stood. And so over this past year and a half, our focus has really changed, right? So now we've been really focused internally on DEI efforts and training the faculty and staff, and on enhancing student programming. And that coincides completely with this lack of ability to be out in the community because of COVID. And so in some ways that's been good, because it's really allowed us to focus in and try to make some plans and try to make some change as far as equity and inclusion goes. But now where we're at is that we're at this point where things are starting to open up again. And so we're ready to get back out there, and we're trying to figure out how we can really intentionally build our programming so that our community can see how community engagement and DEI are interwoven, so that we can really work to figure out how we can, the internal DEI work that we've been doing and that we're going to continue to do, that prepares us then to go out into the community in partnerships, and then really focusing, reflecting on how this work out in the community should then affect our own environment when we're back in the community, and the inclusivity of our own community. But that's all like kind of the theory stuff, right? Like we're talking about language, we're talking about, like, if you look at our website, we're still a little confused. Don't look at our website right now, because I'm going to change it. I'm working on updating it for next week, but next week, look at the website. But you can see how it still says DEI, but then under it, it kind of talks about community engagement. We're still kind of confused how we articulate how we think these things work together. So there's that side of it, but then also there's the challenges kind of for the future as we move forward into next year that I'm sure a lot of you are facing too, is the logistical side. I think did I mention in the beginning that we had partnered with this group called High Resolves that was going to help us integrate community engagement and DEI work. We had this grand 4-year plan of how we were going to build the program over the 4 years, and relied pretty heavily on the organization. And they rebranded just last month, and they're not really going to be a great fit for us anymore. So we've learned we have to balance using partners and to help you do the work and not relying so heavily that when they change, it changes what you're doing. And then also the idea of like, how do we, I'm one person who has this kind of official title, but how do we create partners in our schools to help do the work? And we've tried some different ways with that. And I don't know that we've figured that out either. We've tried all school committees where you had representatives from every division. That was really hard to get everybody to meet at the same time. It was really difficult sometimes for different divisions had different needs. So last year we went to this liaison idea, and it worked well in some divisions, but we also, another challenge that I'm sure we all have is that idea of compensation and reduced loads. So if you're a full-time teacher and you're asked to do this really big extra thing, you get burned out really quickly. And so that necessarily hasn't worked. It's worked well with our middle and upper school, but not with our early childhood and lower school teachers. So there's things that we're still trying to work out. How do we have the bandwidth to do this work? How do we staff this work? How do we articulate our vision and make it a reality? And so I think like my big like takeaways or learning, or I don't think it's advice, but just that things that I've learned over the last few years are just that I have to be realistic, and that this is really big stuff, and that it's better to do a few things better to do a few things well than a bunch of things poorly, and to be realistic about the culture of the school, that it takes a really long time to change culture. And both of these kind of initiatives are not part of the culture at the school that I'm at right now. We're in a bubble, and like many of you, I think. And so how can we make small changes, incremental changes, but keep moving forward? And how do you take care of yourself? And so that would be kind of where I think where I'll end it off. That this year I've really tried, like I was really burned out last year, like I'm sure many of you. And so I'm trying to balance figuring out what I can reasonably do, how I can partner with people in my school and outside of my school to do the work, how we can really articulate a vision, and then just be realistic and try to do our best with what we've got. So no answers, but just kind of a snapshot of what we've been trying to do, and hopefully I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you and coming up with ideas together for how we can do this well.
Awesome. Thank you, Kim. And I'm sure a lot of what Kim just said resonates with all of us and all of the work everyone's doing. Before we move on to the next group, does anyone have any comments or questions that you'd like to put out there? And you can just unmute yourself, or if you feel more comfortable putting it in the chat, I'm happy to read it out loud too.
I just wanted to echo the point that was just made in terms of the burnout. It's real. And, I think it's very important to have leadership on board. Just to say a little bit about me, I work at a private school in Long Island. And for many years, I was in advancement, and I was in charge of advancement. And I have now transitioned into a role that includes advancement, parent, alumni engagement, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the work that we're doing in the approach is really looking at the conversation of diversity, equity, and inclusion is about community. And it's about engaging your community in those conversations. And as a fundraiser, I guess I'm used to having those really difficult conversations. And as a woman of color, especially, I'm personally tied to the subject, and it's been incredible, but the burnout is real, and trying to find support in the work, making the value proposition to your leadership and being able to show that over and over again, I think is important.
Thank you. And in the chat, Kim, there's a question. Could you share what partnering with the community looks like, if you are doing anything, and if you want to share one example or something?
Sure, yeah. So I think that's interesting, right? Because right now it's been, okay. So our goal for partnering with the community was really to deepen these relationships and to have really use service learning and have this be tied to the curriculum and within the school day. The really strong service learning programs that we had have kind of fallen off, with the one with coastal roots because of yes, because of COVID. So our younger kids haven't been able to go out. In our upper school, Matt Jones, one of the teachers, I believe he's here, has done an incredible job keeping up with his service learning project and with his kids in biology, and goes out and does a group called Soul Trees. So it's reforesting and planting trees in our neighborhoods. And so things like that have been more successful that we could do outdoors. And then we have some things, our kids are working with a partner at a school that just finally started allowing people to come back. But right now we're really in the building stage. We need ideas, because so many of the partners and people that we worked with in the past just aren't accepting volunteers right now.
Awesome. Any other questions or comments for Kim? Or anything that made you think of anything you want to share?
We've done at our school in terms of, and I say it more, community engagement. Last year, we had a very intensive process with our community to identify what our priorities around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what it looks like in our community, and really coming up with 5 priority areas. And through that work, in the spring, we had a event where we engaged our students around identity and identifying what it means to be who they are, and explaining that. And then we had a full-on event, community-wide event, that encouraged parents to share a little bit about themselves, and then we shared it with the community. It was really about how, when we talk about diversity, that it's not always the Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, but the fact that we all are diverse. I'm looking at my screen right now, there's a number of Black people on the screen. If you put us all in the room together, we're very different. So our focus has really been about how do we pull out the fact that, we're all unique, and how do we respect the differences. So it's been a lot of dialogue and conversations around that, and trying to bring, activities in the classroom, but then also engaging the parents as well.
And Kim, do you want to tackle the question of how do you help students get away from drives?
Yeah, so what we were doing pre-COVID was, because students, that's their first idea, right? They well, let's give something to somebody, they need things. And so pre-COVID, we started, any student that proposed a drive, we would say, we will only do a drive if we're also going to do some hands-on activity in the community, and a hands-on project in the community. So if you want to do a toy drive for the Women's and Children's Shelter, we are also going to have some different projects at the Women's and Children's Shelter, and opportunities to engage with them person to person before we do that. I will say that Laura had, done this at her school, had narrowed it down to, I think she had 3 drives. That was the goal pre-COVID, that we were going to make this kind of restriction, that we're going to do 3 drives. We always do a food drive, we always do a toy drive, and we would pick one other and just say, those are our drives. And if you have other ideas, or if you want to engage in a community, we'll help you come up with other ideas than just a drive. But then with COVID, we haven't instituted that yet, but I would like to do that for next year, kind of limit it to those 3.
Have you done any virtual engagement of your community in terms of, hosting things like this, bringing them together for dialogue, around dialogue and conversations? Just curious.
Not as far as community engagement. We really have been focused on DEI work. So we've done like parent sessions online, virtual parent sessions last year, but not with our community partners. We had the kids participate in some of Blake's programs, but that was kind of the extent of it.
Sarah,
Don't
did you
mind
have a
if I
question?
could just say something right there. I hope I'm not taking away from the other part, but for what I found, I also work with the Melville Family Foundation that works with children of color and families of color. And what we have learned is that trying to do the virtual, one, it's very hard to get them logged on. And then two, these kids are worn out being on things virtually. So it's really hard. And even at our school, we work with the Texas Ballet Theater, and they even tried to do ballet classes online. And we had a whole bunch sign up, but then they fell through because again, they're just tired of being online. So there's so many great things. And unfortunately, they're just so tired.
Thank you. Sarah, did you have a question?
Yeah, well, not even a question, but we had a similar, and hi, everyone. It's good to see familiar faces. We had a similar kind of DEIJ review, specifically I'm still community service, working on it, community service program at my school. I'm in Newark Academy, but we're not in Newark, so we have a lot built in there. And one of the things we came up with, part of that process was, we call it the SOAP form, which is the Student Opportunity Approval Process, which is kind of a stupid name, but at least it works out. But kids, whether they want to do a drive or anything else, first of all, they have to be associated with a student group on campus. And then they actually put in the kind of not only the outline of what they want to do, but we have DEIJ questions built in that. And then our council of students actually ask the kids. We just had one in the middle school. It was really good. They want to do a Super Bowl, SOUP or bowl school drive in the middle school. And we're like, okay, well, how are you educating around the issues? So it's not like we necessarily completely have gotten away from drives, because that's somewhat hard. I'm still trying to get our parents to get away from drives as well. But that we've built in the expectation, or we're trying to build in the expectation, that every single time you do a drive, there needs to be education around the underlying issue, and then hopefully community connection as well. But I know there's some back and forth about going out in the community and what that looks like. And if you really have time to prepare kids to do that, we're pretty far away from Newark. So our community is a little bit further. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Kim, so much for sharing where you're at and what you're working on and what's going on. We really appreciate that. The next group we're going to hear from is Rye Country Day, who they can tell you how they're doing this work, but they're doing it well, I think. And they're integrating, and I'm going to hand it off to Rebecca.
Rebecca, your sound's not working.
Okay. She's coming to me. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah, take it away.
Great. Don't worry. This is almost perfect because this is the work, right? We literally work closely together. You'll see that in a minute. She's leaving the library and coming in here, which is okay because we do that often. But I don't want to take away any of her awesome intro. But I will say, so I'll just introduce myself. My name is Ali Morgan. I'm the Director of Diversity and Inclusion. And I think what's important and kind of cool to share about Rebecca is that I've been here long enough that I was part of recruiting, and Rebecca to join our community. She's our third director of public purpose, and she'll talk more about that role and that title. That title. I'm introducing you. Come on, is that okay?
Of course.
Yeah, I told her there's a metaphor for
It really is.
for our work together. This is not new for us, so we didn't plan this, but Laura doesn't mind. But I'm sharing a little bit about how we found Rebecca. Rebecca is someone who definitely an educator, but also had this wonderful experience working with nonprofits, and just who she is, and also has studied and has a DEI background, has studied it, lived it. And I share that because, again, she was our third director. The first one I knew, she did a couple of years. The other one I worked closely with for a while, helped build or evolve a lot of the programs. And then, of course, Rebecca, I think, has taken to another level, and with me on the DEI side, which you're going to hear all about. But I'm going to turn it back over to Rebecca so she can share what she wants to share, and then I'm going to be chiming in throughout. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks. And sorry about that. I had to restart my computer because the dreaded coffee spill that I'm sure those of us, I'm sure you can relate to. Anyway, so the tech office had to work with it, but the sound wasn't working. But hi, everyone. So I'm Rebecca Drago. Director of Public Purpose, and this is my 4th year at the school.
Going on 10.
Yes, it feels like many. And Rye Country Day School, it's a competitive college prep school outside of New York City. Just over 900 students, pre-K through 12. And my role is Director of Public Purpose. So I oversee all of the students. We have been working on that shift from community service to community engagement and community impact. And most folks are generally using those terms now. But one of the things that as soon as I got here, I did very quickly and noticed very quickly was that this guy and I were got very close and recognized that our philosophy is really aligned in that public purpose work can't be done well unless it's done through a DEI lens very explicitly. So I would say like a big sort of theme of what we'll talk about today and the way that I approach this work within public purpose is I almost feel like I'm just a broken record with sort of sharing that, with using that language and always saying DEI is public purpose and public purpose is DEI in action, right? And so being able to kind of connect those two things very verbally. And another way that we sort of do that metaphorically is that Ali and I show up to each other's stuff constantly, right? So we're just there, we're physically present together on campus all the time. People see us together, teachers see us together, students see, admin, parents. And I think that helps kind of reiterate this idea that these programs are inherently linked and should be. And then we've been able to kind of make some moves institutionally to represent that in ways that I think, again, kind of hit that home. So what we wanted to talk about, we have a couple sort of just to organize our own thoughts. We have some practices that we'll share that are some, again, I related a lot to what Kim shared. Like, I think a lot of this continues to be a work in progress, but some things that have worked for us, some lessons learned, and then some advice. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I'll add as we go, but I like that framework, and I hope that our colleagues here feel the same way. By the way, I have to say, it is so nice and so good to be around people who sort of believe in the cause, right? I mean, I think it's been a tough time for everybody, and this is what's been keeping us through. This is how we get through each other, sincerely. Like I know when I think someone mentioned, the challenge of Zoom for kids and all, which is so real, right? And so I think, as tough as it is, it helps us prioritize and be reminded of why we do what we do. And so it's just nice to be around you all. I feel a good energy even through Zoom. So thank you for that. But go ahead.
I know, it's very
Rebecca.
grounding.
Yeah.
I appreciate you saying that. So in general, the programs that exist at our school that are public purpose explicit programs, Allison Dorenberg, who some of you might know, she was very involved with this group before that. She's my predecessor and she set up a lot of those programs. I try to take every opportunity to infuse DEI training and programming and language into those projects that exist, right? So when I got here, we have several sort of enrichment-based like tutoring programs that always feel a little complicated to me, right? In terms of sort of upper school students here, tutoring students from the community next door. We're a predominantly white institution.
And a predominantly white town.
And a predominantly,
although
even more predominantly white town.
Yeah. Our school, we sort of joke, or there's a joke out there that we bring the diversity to the town, and that says a lot because we're an independent school. You know what I mean? Good luck with that. But on the other side of the tracks, the proverbial tracks, is a wonderful community that's very diverse. So I think a lot of the programs are built around that sort of natural geography, right?
Exactly. And so we work with that community, we partner with the schools a lot. And so these tutoring programs, I partner with the community sort of engagement person there. And we have young people that either come to our campus to kind of get that enrichment programming on Saturdays or after school and things like that. And I just infuse a lot of training within those sessions. So we talk to the upper school students that are tutors and have some pretty hard conversations about like, what does it mean that we're the sort of tutors in this situation? What does that imply about our level of expertise versus the students that are coming to receive that information, right? And we have that conversation, and it's not about criticizing any group or saying anything about this is inherently good or bad or anything. It's just putting it on the table and saying this is simply a social dynamic that a lot of the students that are coming in for this program are students of color, are students that either speak English as a second language or are bilingual or just speak Spanish. And either take the bus to get here, right? Whatever, what have you. And what does that mean? And so we have those conversations, and then we talk about how to create a dynamic that doesn't allow those students to feel any, less than or anything, but simply as like partnering in the community. So
let me add something.
Yeah,
I want to say, building on that, I think one of the things that Rebecca just described, but it's so important, I think, for all of you out there in the work, like being honest about those facts is a big part of our program. And again, I love Rebecca for this. She brought that. That's who she is. I have that, but it's so nice to have a partner. And the kids respond beautifully to that. They really do. Even if their parents still have challenges with that. And so what I mean is we prep them, of course, as training, Rebecca leads, and a lot of what she's talked about is sort of built into it. And I think they really internalize that. There's an opportunity for reflection. There's opportunity to kind of have a conversation in a safe place, safe space to talk about what it means to be someone who has a lot of resources and going to interact. And we are in this bubble. We're close to New York City, but a lot of these kids don't know much about New York City. And I say that, kind of like, oh my God. Rebecca and I, so we like field trips too. And we could talk about that right now. That's tough. We can't do it the way we'd like, but I want to mention that. Also want to mention, we've been able to really feature or sort of attract and support many kids of color and who represent a much broader group to help lead a lot of this. So we open it up to everyone, and people know that, and they do come, but we've had some really wonderful leaders who are so passionate, but also bring their personal experience. And that's important, but that's a delicate thing, because you don't want them to feel like they have to do that. And you also want to sort of protect them a little bit, or support them, and like there's a vulnerability built into that, excuse me. But we've had a lot of success with it, including on the adult side. Like people that, and that doesn't come without, really scaffolding this work. But I would name that as something that, you could try, or I think is worth going for if you can. Sometimes you need those people in your community to begin with. There's that DEI connection, right? I work hard on hiring and retention here. This is the season right now for us. Well, if I bring more of those wonderful people in, there's more people to work with Rebecca's program formally, right? They have the skill set. They're already into it. It means a lot. They have a lot of skills, and so there is this like 2 degrees of separation away, but so connected to the work, and it's part of like the ecosystem of how this actually works.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. And I think that that's an important way to think about it, is who's actually leading the programs within the school itself. So that's a big part of it. And then I would say there's some formal ways that we have sort of instituted this work in various places on campus. So there's been different iterations, I think, similarly to Kim, of our social justice coordinators. And our current model, we did this 2 years ago.
2 years ago, summer social justice.
Yes, exactly.
The
summer of 2020.
Just like Kim.
Yeah, exactly. Summer of 2020. Ali and I both used to have a coordinator for each division that was paid a small stipend. So the compensation piece is still tricky. They're compensated, but not very much. So it's hard to ask to do, too much. But, we would each have one for lower, middle, upper. And then Ali has staff and athletics, right? And then we decided to combine those, and now we call them the social justice coordinators, and we meet as a big team. We have some scheduling challenges around how to actually meet together, but we make it sort of an hour and a half over the course of everyone's lunch, so people come and go. We meet once a cycle, so once every 8 days for us. We just came from our meeting today, so and it's great, and we're able to kind of keep tabs on like how things are going within each division and have those two things feel really integrated. So like today we came up with this idea from a community partner that I partner with often. We both do really, from a local food pantry. And he is someone who just specifically cares about like showing young people how to do public purpose style work in really ethical ways. And he wants to bring his food pantry truck to our campus. And I meet with him regularly, and I said, what do you need now, Bill? And he said, I want you to come here and have the students like actually pack the truck. And so what Ali and I are planning on doing with the help of our coordinator team is building out a program from there. And one of our, I would say, tips and tricks, it sounds sneakier than it is, but I think we want to almost like package the sort of DEI work with younger students through public purpose programming. Because I think we've all experienced this, I'm sure we certainly do, but I think parents, depending on the age, get a little finicky, right, when we talk about doing DEI work explicitly with younger kids. But that work those conversations do need to come up, and they come up with public purpose kind of naturally. So when we talk about food access and equity, what communities are we talking about? And why do certain communities have access to food and others don't have as much? And so we're going to sort of build out a program from there. And that was something that came together in that space. So that's been really great for us. Do you want to talk about social justice committee?
Yes, I would love to. So similar to, so Rebecca shared a little bit about the evolution of the coordinator role, which I understand some of you already have something like that. Before that evolution, there was an evolution of a committee. So as many schools do, we have, sort of employee committees or faculty committees or some version of that for all kinds of things, sustainability, global study. For us, it tends to be a lot more around initiatives, but it doesn't have to just be that. There's one on communications and so forth. So there used to also be a diversity committee, and there's also a public purpose committee. They're both, important and sort of thriving. And then we did a program review of the public purpose program some years ago now, maybe, over 5 years or 5 or 6 years. And it was really good. And one of the things that came out of that was the recommendation that we maybe partner. And I was thinking that too, just because at that point in time, our public purpose numbers were a little lower in terms of just participation. And that, with the work we do, that happens, right, for a number of reasons. And I felt like it would be nice I wanted to help, but also I thought, well, why are we, and there's a lot of meetings, right? Someone earlier talked about bandwidth and just sort of being burnt out. Like that's what we're dealing with right now for sure. We were dealing with that before the pandemic, right? Because it's the nature of the work. So there was a sort of sense of like, let's, instead of 10 or 12 meetings, and we did have some folks who would do both, but we often sort of put them in a position where they had to choose. So long story short, we came together into what we became Social Justice Committee, which is so important. And then someone also mentioned, I think Kim, SDLC, many of you know, Student Diversity Leadership Conference. There's an NAIS program for the students. Every year for us, we have a tradition where the students come to the meeting to share what they've learned and lead the meeting. And so a few years ago, the group of students who chose this one right here, students are participating in our hiring process. Top choice. Ms. Drago, get her, please. We want her. I was proud to bring her here. We had this wonderful meeting, and at the end, one of the students said, "Hey, Mr. Morgan, can we come back?" And I went to Rebecca. Rebecca's like, "Yeah, why not?" So we checked, and so that's been happening, and that's been great. It's the only committee in the school where students are part of it with faculty. I think it's part of why people come. They do love to hear from them. It's not always easy, I have to say. In the last couple of years, in particular, we've heard student voice is important, and we sort of elevated that, and we've heard from quite a few students directly, but in the meeting, and we've had to work with them outside of the meeting, right, Rebecca? They're like, it's hard to hear. That doesn't work. That's not, that's not effective. Or here's what you should be focused on. Or you have, your heart is big, you want to do well, but that's really not where we need you to focus your energies, right? So those things have come out of that. But Social Justice Committee, I think, is very important because it's a nice way for us to bring in some wonderful topics, but also to learn and hear what people are from the ground. So.
Yeah, and one topic that always comes to mind for me, one of our favorite meetings, I think, was when we had one of our community partners come in, and he works at an immigrant resource center we partner with all the time. And he talked about his experience working around fighting like wage theft for day laborers. And it was like a blending of sort of DEI, right? He's an activist. He's doing all kinds of work to actually push back on the public policy in New York around folks that are undocumented who don't have access to the money that they should be paid within the day labor community. And so that colleague came to speak, and it was pretty powerful. So anyway, we're able to do some cool things there, I would say. And then the last thing we can talk about is we've always done a lot of work around MLK Day. And then last year, sort of riding that wave of what it felt like the whole community being really enthusiastic about DEI work, more so than they had been previously. We decided to expand it to the MLK Week of Social Impact. So we do a pretty big, like all three divisions, everyone on board. We have various projects. We have a community art project. We make gift bags that are donated by folks, because the community partner that we partner with for that event really asked for that. We run an assembly, we have speakers, and that's run by, again, both of our offices. So that's a very visible public event that takes place over the course of a week, that both last year and this year, I would say, have gone very well. Yeah. We can move to the lessons learned, of which there are 8 billion. I would say the biggest one we have is probably just around flexibility and kind of being strategic, honestly, figuring out what are the places where our public partnership is very clear. What are the places where, Ali is helping me behind the scenes, or I'm helping him behind the scenes, that sort of thing. It's like being really tuned into our community. Often our parent community is what we kind of have to be tuned into to figure out where we're able to push. And where we could kind of sit back for a minute and push a little bit later, right? That sort of thing. But yeah, I think
that's great. That's great. I'm gonna do a quick highlight. And I think you're here, Rebecca. I want to if there's questions, because we know that's the one of the best ways we can help. But I want to call out something that unique that came out of Rebecca being here. So earlier we talked about, and I think actually Kim mentioned this, which is, I think is a pattern for a lot of schools, if not all schools. Lower school teachers just have a lot more to carry. Literally, they're in the classroom all the time. They have the littles, who I love. We love that, you know, each school is unique, but like in terms of just their day, it's very different, right? And so there's not a lot of sort of down or prep time during the day. So because of that, you know, we always help out. But one of the things we did a few years ago was train them. We actually did a formal DEI training over a couple of years, actually, 3 or 4 sessions, sort of built around the cycle of socialization. Rebecca, you know, sort of designed it beautifully. I contributed for sure, but it was wonderful. And they were vulnerable. They opened up. It took some time, but you could see sort of a foundation being laid for the first time in a long time, maybe ever, for some of them, where they could kind of have some quality time to learn, but with our guidance. And what was, I think, important, and to use Rebecca's word, strategic about that, was it came from us. It was an internal training, right? Nothing wrong with bringing someone from the outside, but we're the people that are with them all the time anyway, and we're the ones who are going to cover and do things. But to get them to sort of feel comfortable with us, more comfortable, they're already comfortable with us. But I found that to be very important. And yeah, there's always going to be some turnover. Our lower school tends to be pretty stable. Over the last couple of years with COVID, we've had to expand and get more teachers to help us. But I want to call that out because I do think the burnout's real. That's still happening. But I feel now more than ever, the work they're doing in the classroom, even if they don't have the energy to create a new project or to lead something, you know, we'll help them. But I think that was key. I really think that was key. And I think that's something that I would suggest out there for folks to at least explore. There's a lot of ways to go about it, but to like give them, and this is a little bit more longer term plan, right? But give them some other things that you know will pay dividends down the line with their comfort level and their ability to kind of lean into discomfort, but lean into the work and say, no, you know what, I can do this. Or I need some help, but I can do this. So.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. Okay, so that's all we had sort of prepared. Laura, there are some questions in the chat. Do you want to?
Yeah, there are a bunch. And so let's ask a couple of those and then we'll let Michaela talk. And then we have some time built in after that for all of us to talk. So that's another time we can get to that. But it seems like early on, there's a lot of questions about how you do this work with lower school and early childhood. I'm sure that's like prevalent for most people too. Like, how do you do this there? As you just talked about training inside, which is a really cool idea. But is there any other like quick hitter strategic thing that you do for early childhood or lower school?
I think, you know, I would call out, you know, the calendar a little bit. Rebecca has a few things built in that are kind of go-tos, whether it's like the Rye Nature Center, like, you know, some are lighter than others, but again, it's a family approach with the lower school. Obviously, you have to be thoughtful about that. You have to understand who your families are. For us, I would say our least amount of diversity is in our lower school. We're working on that, promise. But so what I mean is that there are some folks that we'd love to come who may not come, but it's really a nice way, kind of to Rebecca's point she's made a few times about how to get the DEI work in, but in a way that they can digest and it's accessible. And so I think that's been great. Just sort of having a few things built into the calendar. They're favorites for sure, but people kind of understand. There's some community pieces to that we can do as well. But I think that's one way to do it. And the parent education piece, which actually for us, we go through cycles. Right now, we're in a tougher period of it, right, Rebecca, despite our efforts, which we get. I think some of that's based on this past spring and, you know, some of the responses to CRT and DEI and all kinds of stuff. There's just all kinds of things out there. But so we're navigating that. But I do think, you know, you get that parent education piece going, or ideally on a, you know, concurrently. And then we have a couple things on the calendar. And then you sort of just figure out where can we kind of, you know, pick one thing, right? Or we can fit in. A lot of it we're always doing. It's kind of funny to us that like we're doing all this work. Oh, Rebecca, your group, your committee you added for the parents. I think that might be, and that's a new thing you've been trying to do for years. Yeah.
So this year I was able to implement a public purpose parent committee with the specific goal of being able to engage our lower school kids more. And I was very clear with them from the start about like, how do we philosophically approach public purpose here? And again, rooting that in DEI. And Ali has a parent group and has had it for years. And so continuing to kind of chip away. And then as Ali mentioned, like doing some programming and always doing those trainings. So we have like a school-wide can drive every fall. And I work with the PE teachers because it's like a fun run that they do to, you know, raise money for the cans. But we learn a lot about the Carver Center, the agency we partner with for that. And the students all go on the website. And then we have a whole sort of lesson plan about like who is there and why, that sort of thing. So even for these models that feel a little bit more old school in some ways, trying to kind of infuse, and not that they're not doing good work, right? The Carver Center relies on those cans every fall. They have for a decade or two,
Absolutely,
right? So
absolutely.
anyway, those are just a couple of things that come to mind.
Awesome, that's helpful. And what I'm going to do for everyone, I know there's some other questions, and we definitely will talk about pre-engagement, like what Rebecca's doing, what they're doing together to get kids prepared possibly before they're going out in the community, and we'll talk about that. But I do want to allow some time for Michaela to talk. And so when we were thinking about putting this programming together, I was thinking that it would be really neat. Michaela and I have actually worked together for 11 years almost, off and on. And Michaela has served a role at multiple schools in our Dallas Independent School District, where she's been a liaison at a middle school or an elementary school. And her job not only, and she can talk about this, is to be a liaison to the communities that they serve, but also to the communities that are coming into her school. And I think a lot of times we do these webinars and we have these conversations, but we don't always hear from what works, what doesn't work, what happens, what goes wrong when people come in, and what goes right. And I think we can learn a lot from the people that we partner with. Almost, I would say more. And so Michaela has graciously on her snow day as well joined us and was going to share a little bit about that. And then we'll open up for questions for Michaela, and then we'll just open it up for everybody so we can talk. I know there's a lot to discuss. So take it away.
Okay, good morning. And thank you, Laura, for letting me participate. This is such a great, hearing these conversations are so great to hear that they're happening. Just a quick little background on myself. I'm a product of private school education. My kiddos were, I know nothing different. So we retreaded and did private school education as well. When I started working in the schools, in the public schools, wow, my eyes opened up. Guess what? These kids aren't scary. These kids aren't thugs. These kids aren't everything that I brought my own bias from all my years into the schools. These parents want everything the best for their kids, just like we want for our own children. It's all the same. The kids just want to find a place where they belong. Sometimes some of them are falling behind in math, some are falling behind in reading. And we're not going in there to save the world. We're just helping one another become a better person. And so that's one of the things that I learned through my own experience coming in. Currently, my last one is in a public school, high school. So it was the best fit for him. And that has been my experience as a parent. Definitely eye-opening just for myself, for my own growth. One of the things that you guys have hit on and I really like it, and we try to do, I know Laura and I have worked on this as well as we work with a group called United to Learn. And when the students come into the school, and I work at 2 elementaries right now. So when the students come into the school, I usually like to give them an opportunity to get a tour, kind of understand, where they're going to be going, get a feeling of our school first. And for them to have the opportunity to ask questions, anything they might want to understand. And I think Hockaday does, and United to Learn both do an incredible job of preparing the students for coming into our schools. But it has to be a relationship, as we all know, with people like myself on the inside of the school that you're visiting, and with your partners like Laura Day, but definitely building those connections with those students that are coming in. I think that is huge. They need to feel comfortable. We all need to feel comfortable around one another. They can ask questions and understand. One of the best things I heard too at the end is reflecting. I like to take, if I can, sometimes it's a pop in and out, but to take the opportunity after the time that the students that are visiting our schools to kind of reflect on what they learned, what they saw. And sometimes it's actually very good for me because they might have heard something that's going on with that student that I would not have otherwise known. It's wonderful to hear the students that are visiting, the things that they're learning. And what it all boils down to, what we all know is relationship building. And so what I ask them to think about is when they come in is quickly, what are the 5 things that you thought you were going to encounter when you came into Nathan Adams? I mean, just boom, boom, boom. And then I'm like, okay, so let's not build from there. Let's build from your experience. Let's and move forward. And the only way to do that is by having those relationships, and it's by connecting with, oh, what's your favorite game that you like to play? Those kinds of things. And then from there, they're able to build trust, which we know in our communities is huge. So we need to build that trust. And then another thing is consistency, always being consistent. I try to really instill that into the kiddos. If this is a program that you want to be in, then I need you to come every time that you say you're going to come, unless you're sick or something like that. But I mean, every time you're going to say you're going to come, so that we can continue building on that connection. And what else did I hear that I kind of changed this up a little bit just because I heard some of the things that you were saying. Volunteers. So right now, opportunities for volunteering, because our doors are closed. The only ones that we are allowing in the building at this time are actual Dallas ISD partnerships, which really just means people who work with United to Learn in the schools that we have already connected with partnerships, such as Hockaday and Jesuit and other private schools in our area. So it's really hard. It is really hard. We have tried the mentorship online. It's okay, but it's you know, it's not the same as when they're here. One of the great programs that Hockaday has done in the past for us is they come during lunchtime with the girls, and they just kind of have lunch with them for a while and build those communication, and then they start a mentoring program, and which also is a tutoring program at the same time. So many things are happening in that one little area. So right now we're so glad to be able to open those doors back up, and they'll be coming back into our schools. Another opportunity that we've seen is just building true partnerships, because that's what I want to have on my campuses, not just receiving, but how can we come together? There are things that our families can do. We want to be part of building our community just like everybody else. And whether that is you're doing a food drive, let us help us do a food drive to whatever you're doing. If you're doing cards for the elderly, let our little ones make cards as well. Whatever we can do together. And if you're doing coming on our campus to do something, guess what? That's a great opportunity to engage our parents and our students so that they can feel part of their school and making it just as vibrant instead of someone just coming in and do it. We love that you guys come and do all these wonderful things, but what I try to have our families do is they too need to invest in the community that we all live in. And so that is very important for me. And one of the things that my principal told me, he's now moved on, and he said, I was talking to him the other day, and he says, you know what? He goes, Michaela, he said, I grew up poor, but I didn't know I was poor. And he goes, that's something we need to think about when we're, walking into schools. And I was like, yeah, I mean, that makes total sense. And then we always need to step back, myself as well, as I'm walking into the schools, is what is my purpose? What is my intent? And go back to that. And so at that, I'm just going to leave it there. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, anything for Michaela. She's been working in the schools for a long time and had a lot of partners come in and out. I'm sure some who've done it better than others. So any questions for that or comments?
And I think if the kids come in more in, wanting to engage the other children rather than this is something I have to put on my resume, because I remember my kids used to have to fill out so many hours before they had to move on, rather it just being something they put on the resume, then that, obviously there's going to be a different impact as well.
Totally. I'm just pausing because I don't want to talk over it. Remember Zoom pauses? We haven't had those in a while. It's good for everybody to be a part of them again when you're teaching. Oh, we got a new message. Could you give some examples, Michaela, of what it looks like when partners do this work well And then on the other side, when partners have come in and they don't do it well and it doesn't land well for the community, do you have an
Right.
example maybe for?
Right. So a lot of it is just communication and organization before time. And I know on your side of it, it's a lot of work. But that is what makes all the difference in the world, because when all these things are organized and then we can come together, then it all just falls into place. Because as you know, what's happening right now, if we have all these things put together, then all of a sudden, oops, we can't do it because the doors are closed again because we're in red. It makes it easier, and to be able to reconnect with the kids again. When we don't, and all we're doing is coming in real quick and we're running in, doing a tutorial session and then running out, then that's when it falls apart, because there's no real buy-in, if you will. You're just coming in to check the box that you did your community outreach, and it just falls apart automatically like that. So just a lot of what you're already doing, a lot of time putting it together, keeping open conversations with the other person. Hopefully at the schools that you're visiting with people like myself, instead of just the principal who has 5,000 other things going on and just kind of throwing you anywhere. Definitely get on the other side. You want to make sure that there is a place and a time for your students, because they want to feel that their time is being used wisely as well. Not just, one day we're here, one day we're there, and then no one gains from that, and it just falls apart. And next year you don't want to have students that want to participate.
It's true. I'll say something too, just in terms of Michaela and I's partnership. For myself, the more I'm on the campus, which I go to the campus sometimes, and I guess I'm allowed to because of whatever partnership, but the more time that I'm there, the more than I actually, because Michaela's really busy, like all of our community partners are. But if I can physically see her and say what's going on, like recently I was just at our campus for another project, and I went and was like, and I had all this stuff at the school, I had all these snacks for kids, and I was like, what am I going to do with all this stuff? And I was like, are you guys needing snacks? She's like, oh my gosh, we're giving snacks as incentives for all the testing that's going on. And I was like, I'll be right back. And so I ran back and came, but the only way that would happen is proximity, right? Is because,
Right.
and I know Michaela, and I'm going in with a lens of like, what do you need? How can I be helpful? And just trying to like not add much to her plate, but be like, what's going on? And then making those connections. So I think proximity helps. And when Michaela and I see each other in person, I think it's better for all people involved.
Right. And one of the other things that works well is in the partnership, and Haggaday's doing this, and I know we've done it with Parish at another school, is their Spanish classes will come over into our schools and they work together on different projects. So together they're working, and it's not just, the high school coming over to, save our little kiddos. So it's great because the kids feel that they're participating in something. And I just want to brag on you a little bit, if I can, is at Hockaday, the kids did an incredible program with books and everything. And they came back again this year. And what was funny, it's been, I guess they got these books maybe in first grade, and they're now in their 4th or 5th grade year. And they said, oh, we're going to do this. And they were like, oh yeah, we remember doing this. This was so much fun. And some were like, we still have those books at home. So, the things that you guys are doing, but when we're able to do it together, we're working together, I think that makes all the difference in the world.
Awesome. Thank you, Michaela, for sharing that. And I'm sure there'll be other questions as we all start talking. But I do want to talk too, and just because it seemed like an important question and something I'm sure a lot of you came here for, is, and maybe this is something that the Rye Country Day people can answer, is what are you doing before you're sending your students into the community? So before you're sending them to tutor or to work in communities that might be different than your own community, what are you guys doing in that space? I think that's helpful for people to hear.
Yeah, I'm happy to share a little bit about that. So we do it in different iterations, but there's a couple examples that I think they're ones that I strive for the other programs to also have. So the best one is the Community Engagement Fellowship that we run over the summer, that I've probably talked about in various spaces and with this crew, but it's a big project that students apply for, and they are awarded a $1,000 grant, so it's accessible to everyone. And it's equitable in that way. And they partner with a community partner and implement a huge 4-week project. That's pretty substantial. And honestly, I think a big part of the reason we're able to do so much training beforehand is because they're like contracted essentially, right? Because there's that grant component. They kind of have to sign on to about 8 hours of seminars that take place over 4 different days in like late spring before they go and actually implement their projects. And within those, I've developed alongside the 2 co-directors I have and with the support of Ali, developed a curriculum that gets into some really like deeper philosophical discussions about ethical service and some of the pitfalls. We read a couple pieces that I'm happy to share here. We go through like some Tania Mitchell, right, about critical service learning versus traditional. So we actually get into kind of like pedagogy and approaches to this in some big ways. And that group tends to really, really we get good, very positive feedback from about that particular group because they have spent so much time. The way we've done that, because not every project can be that intensive for a lot of reasons, but we also have like a big middle school project that the students build out community engagement projects over the course of the year. And there's an adult supervisor that sort of helps them. And I send out agendas and, get some prep for them. And within that, the training that those students do within the bounds of the project are again going to the organization's website and then doing sort of a facilitated activity about what does it mean to be committed to this organization, and how do we approach that work in a way that feels partnership driven and balanced. We have them connect with someone on the ground if they're able to, and really ask a lot of questions. And before, there's 4 or 5 meetings of that group that really is about dialogue and talking before they're even allowed to do any sort of activist engagement project. That's more about the kind of they end up doing drives or fundraising or getting on the ground or that sort of thing. But it's built into the kind of project. I saw there's a question in the chat about the name of that project. So that's the Community Engagement Fellowship. We got a grant through the E.E. Ford Foundation to run that. That money has since run out, but we've been able to fundraise within the community by the skin of our teeth. We're very close to, we're working on it, but we got it funded for this summer.
Creative accounting.
Creative accounting, that's a nice way to put that. But yeah, so we do a lot of training in different formats throughout the year, I would say. And another thing, the last piece that I'm hoping to do this coming year is create a student group, right? And I know that Laura has experience with this, with having sort of a public purpose style student leadership board. And I'm actually hoping that they're going to do a lot of the training in the future, because I think that works better than the adults coming in, right? So having them really understand what is this work and how is it rooted in DEI, and then they can sort of be the messengers within their peers for that programming.
And then I was going to ask one other question, and this can also be open to all of you out there, really. Do you have examples in ways that you check in with your high school students to see, are they actually getting the deeper understanding of what they're doing in the community? The reflection piece that I know I have a lot of trouble making time for, and I think a lot of us do. Is anyone having any success with that after you're doing these programs? I'll open it up to people that spoke or anyone else.
Hi there. Can you hear me? Maria McIver from Oregon Episcopal School. One thing that we did start to do this year in terms of reflection, but I'm really eager to grow in that area as well. So I'd love to hear from all of you, but that we've recently done was our students, we have a student newspaper. It's very active. And also it's called OES Stories that goes out each week, and they're little videos. Some of them are silly and fun. Some of them are informative. And I had the students in my community engagement activity as part of their reflection. They had to do something outward facing to the community where they were sharing what they did, discussing what it meant to them, and talking about the agency that they worked with. So the OES Stories interviewed them, and they had a whole guided reflection that I had given them. So they were able to share those questions with the interviewers. And then that got published on the school website that the students all look at, parents look at, kids look at, so that they were sort of putting the word out there. They had an authentic audience. So they really had to think through what they wanted to say. And then a couple of other students actually wrote an article in the school newspaper about the work that they had done. And I said, and your job is to kind of try to pass the baton so that other students want to join in with the work. So those were reflections that, as I said, had authentic audiences that were outward facing, and I provided them with some reflection before that felt somewhat productive, but I think it could be more developed, and I'm not sure what other folks are doing.
And keep your eye on the chat because there's a bunch of stuff going there. Because I know there are a bunch of questions directed at the Rye Country Day crew. And so they're going to start popping some stuff in the chat for you. And then also people who did kind of the informal on the way drive home check-ins. But maybe we're not doing as many of the drive homes together right now. So that makes it more challenging. But if other people have any questions or thoughts around how you're doing reflection for this deeper understanding, this infusion of DEIJ and community engagement.
I'm Ace Everett from the Potomac School. In McLean, Virginia, pre-pandemic, we did a windows and mirrors exercise after going out into the community and serve. And we did it in groups of about 30 with the same grade level that had served at similar types of other early childhood education or working around food insecurity. And that was an engaging activity, getting them to reflect to prompts on a card, asking questions regarding windows and mirrors to reflect on their life experience based upon the interaction and what they learned at their partners and what they experienced. And then they went around and shared with one another because they'd gone to slightly different sites. And so that was kind of an engaging way to do something directly after service.
I can share another, if that's okay, Laura, just something that I saw in the chat about the kind of training beforehand. Something that Ali and I often do is we refer back to sort of an identity chart, like an old, DEI training tool of different types of oppression and different types of privilege, and doing that workshop within a public purpose training, but asking students like, what type of oppression is this issue dealing with? And having them peel back the layers on. So like we did one with, we partnered with a local agency that does work with adults with different abilities, and students went in and sort of sang songs alongside that community. It was like this beautiful, just like the student-driven music partnership. But we came in and talked about what is ableism, and what are some myths and stigmas, and like what are some things we can learn from this community and that sort of thing. But like actually using that tool directly has been useful for us. But I also, sorry, I just wanted, I appreciate the point about the reflection, because that's something I'm always like, we both are always struggling with. So
that is and will continue to be a work in progress, but whoever's got it, let us know. I just want to quickly call out, there's two sort of outward facing events that Rebecca leads that I think has this element. It's not going to cover everybody, but we do the community dinner, and then in the fall for the community engagement fellowship, where you let them share. And I just find it's inspirational to hear from the kids, but those kids who share, and some of it, she's obviously going to find kids who she feels strongly based on their project that they have something to say. And the one in the fall she can talk more about, it has a component where it's like a little bit like Science for a Star, where you can go around and learn more about what they did and stuff like that. But I think what we hear every year is our students who have a deep understanding of and have been impacted directly by what they've done and what they've learned and what they've they're different after the project or projects plural. So I just want to call it, because I think that's something many of you are probably already doing, or maybe you want to try to do, and Rebecca can talk more about it, because they're, again, two events. They're more on the community side, like open to everyone, sort of trying to bring everyone in to learn more about our program. So that's sort of the focus. But I think in doing so, you do have this reflective piece which to me is like one of the best moments of it, when you hear a kid talk about like the impact of being, in the community doing something, and particularly the kids who may, sort of our target audience of like, this is totally different than anything in their lives, right? So I don't know, just a little bit.
Well, yeah, and I think the community dinner is a nice example. Again, something that Allison sort of built out with Ali was we invite all of our community partners to come to that, and so we have a lot of folks from our community our nonprofits that come and break bread with us, right, and have it be this sort of showcase, and it ends up being like a really relationship building event that I think is nice. And I look forward to the day we're able to do it again. Hopefully we can do something this year outdoors or something. We weren't able to last year, but yeah, that's a hope.
Yeah.
That's an awesome idea. I already put that in the chat, but I'm going to say it again. That's such a cool idea to have a dinner and get everybody together. I was going to throw one more thing in there before maybe we can open it up, and then soon we'll hand it off to Blake to do one last thing. But I was going to say that something that we've really gotten into really recently is this book that I just read called The Art of Noticing. And I don't know if anyone has read that, but you should get it. And it has about 100 and something different activities where it makes students. And so it's almost like, I'd say a lot of what we're doing now is front loading reflection, which seems kind of weird, but we're making students notice what's around them, what they see and what's going on, and go through that process before we even begin. As something as silly as recently, the assistant director is actually on the Zoom right now, and she had our sixth graders who were, and this is small, but it's an interesting thing. They had to put up all these flyers about water usage that they had made to learn advocacy skills. But before we put them up and did anything, she took them on a walk around the school and had them notice, like, where do people go and where are people like congregating and where do people seem most happy and most joyful? So it's like this, almost like you're flipping it and you're like noticing before you're going in the activity, which is like this wild reflection they're doing, so they're more impactful. And the book is there. Way to go, Laura Lee. Well, book's in the chat. Super cool. Use it everywhere you can. It really, in a sense, blends these two worlds, right? That seem different, but it brings them together. So I'm just going to put that as a quick tip. Anything else people want to say or have questions about? We have like 1 or 2 minutes for something here at the end, and then we're going to talk about how do you move forward. And I agree, it's a beautiful partnership in your offices. I think a lot of us aspire to have that kind of collaboration that you guys are showing. So it's really neat. Thank you for that.
I wanted to comment on one angle that we've discussed on our end, if that's okay, is making sure that when we're discussing how DEI and public purpose work together, we're not only focusing on outside of our school. So there are equity questions within the student body as well. And that's been a really powerful lever for us to pull when we want to move away from things like drives for certain kinds of items that might be pretty expensive for a family to go out, buy, contribute, things like that. So how are we also using this space to shine a spotlight on our own equitable practices or lack thereof in school?
It's a great point. Really good point. Thanks for sharing that. It's important. Any other points people want to share before we do the final goal setting? We don't like anyone leaving webinars at NNSP unless you think about what your next steps are. Because if you don't, then you'll never, well, if you're me, if you don't write them down and then like carry them around with you for days, it'll never happen, right? So we're gonna make sure that we talk about what could happen as we leave. But anything else, I just want to make sure I don't cut anyone off if they had something they want to say or a question. Okay. Blake's gonna talk to us about how we take this on and how we learn from this. And obviously it's such a wonderful room of people that the conversation can continue. And I know Blake will send up a follow-up. So if you want to get in touch with each other.
I will. Thank you. Thank you to all our presenters. It takes a lot of courage to talk about your programs and expose not just all the good things, but the struggles and the hurdles. So I appreciate the honesty and really what you all are doing and your perspective. And I'm not going to talk to you because I don't really have a lot that I feel like I can share about this, because you guys have done such an excellent job of just getting my thoughts spurring. And Jesse, I will say that what I thought what you said at the end is so important. And it also makes me think like that's a really good place to bring these conversations into the lower grades, because you start in the lower grades talking about identity and your community and all that. And so you can start inward there with those conversations and build up to having you go out in the community. So you're really starting internally talking about these DEI with a DEI lens. So anyway, I thought that was an excellent point at the end. Laura is not wrong that I feel like every webinar should be should culminate with some feeling of action, right? So that we feel like we are all going to go and do something with the knowledge that we have just learned. So I am going to ask you to do two things. One is I would like you to write down on a piece of paper, because I too cannot do anything if it is not in a list, right? If it's not in a list, it's not going to happen. So 3 actionable items that you are going to move on between now and your spring break. So just take a minute to do that first. 3 action, and no one is judging, and there's absolutely only A+ for participation. So and if you feel courageous, you may feel free to put it in the chat. There's no pressure, but if you would like to share and also see what others are thinking that they're going to take action on, feel free. Give me a hands up if you're ready to move to the next one.
I took a picture of mine with my phone just as a trick for people, because then if it's a photo, I'll like have to go back and look at it.
Make it your
Just
screensaver. Just really just like post it to your forehead.
Yeah, I mean, really, it's got to be in front of your face. If any of you, all of you who do this work, it's like if it's on my photos, I'm gonna look.
Okay, so the next thing that I want, and the last thing I want you to do, is to write down and share, if you feel free, an idea that you're going to share with a colleague before the end of the week. Something you heard here that you think if you share with somebody else might gain traction or will be interesting to them, or share a book or what have you. But the more people we have involved in this work, the better it's going to be. So who are you going to share it with, and what is it that you're going to share? Okay. So I want you to take both of those things and hold on to them. You've got 2 days to do the idea sharing, and you've got a couple of weeks till spring break, right? Those of you who have snow days tomorrow already announced, I'm looking at you, Laura and Michaela. I'll give you till next week to share your idea. Take your snow day and enjoy it. I really want to thank all of you. It is, I say it often, but to show up for 90 minutes on Zoom in the middle of the week, in the middle of the day is remarkable at this point in time. So thank you all for being here. These are important conversations. I cannot wait to have these conversations in person. But in the meantime, I love bringing you all together. Somebody said it, oh, it was Ali at the beginning, like, you all are my home. I really feel connected when I'm with you. It's why I love my job so much. So thank you for continuing to show up and to have these conversations, for doing your work in your school and your communities. You probably don't get thanked very often in your schools or in your community. So I am thanking you on behalf of everybody in the world. I'm thanking you because I have that privilege to do that. But no, really, what you are doing is so crucially important to not just your kids, but your families, your school, and your communities. So keep up the good work. And I really hope you all are surviving and doing well. And we will have another webinar coming up probably in April. We'll take March off because most of you will be away on spring break. And I want to alert you to, we have two sort of extended professional development opportunities in June called Degrees of Impact. One is simply about designing and implementing community engagement programs in your school. And the second one is a little more tailored to how do you make sure it is connected to your curriculum. So how do you get these things out of a notion of an extra and into a co-curricular or curricularly based. So those are on our website. I'll include them when I include the video and all the links and the chat and everything else that came along with today. And if anybody wants to be connected with anybody else and they don't know how to do it, please reach out. I'm happy to put people in contact with each other. And with that, I will say, have a great rest of your day. Thank you to my presenters, and Laura, thank you for pulling this together. It was fantastic. So thank you.
More of these conversations to come. Thank you.
Thank you.